Judge Gabriel Lawson's life changed in an instant. After purchasing a thoughtful anniversary gift for his wife, Gabriel, a respected black judge, was wrongly accused of a violent crime and brutally arrested by a white officer in front of a horrified crowd. As footage of the event went viral, the arrest exposed deep-seated racial bias within the very justice system Gabriel once believed in. Struggling to regain his dignity, Gabriel and his wife, Ava, a fierce civil rights attorney, embark on a journey to uncover a conspiracy that threatens everything they hold dear. In this gripping story of betrayal, courage, and redemption, Gabriel is forced to decide how far he'll go to seek justice in a system designed to fail him. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. One evening, after a long day at the courthouse, Judge Gabriel Lawson, a distinguished black judge, found himself browsing the sparkling displays of an upscale jewelry store. His mind was focused on one thing: finding the perfect anniversary gift for his beloved wife, Ava. Casually dressed in a hoodie and jeans, Gabriel knew that despite his relaxed attire, his reputation allowed him to move seamlessly through such spaces. His eye landed on an exquisite diamond necklace, one that seemed to capture Ava's elegance and grace. He approached the counter, smiling warmly at the saleswoman as he made his purchase. "Excellent choice, sir," the saleswoman remarked, her glance momentarily flickering over his casual clothes before professionally boxing the necklace. Gabriel's phone buzzed in his pocket as he checked the time. It was almost 7 p.m. He mentally calculated the time it would take to drive home, change into something more formal, and surprise Ava with her gift during their dinner. A small smile crossed his face as he imagined the joy on her face when she opened it. However, across town, a very different scene was unfolding. At another high-end jewelry store, panic ensued as a masked man brandished a gun, terrorizing staff and customers alike. The robbery was swift but chaotic, with the thief swiftly grabbing diamonds and watches while leaving a scene of destruction behind. Moments later, the police arrived, gathering descriptions from traumatized witnesses. The details came in fast: a black male in his late 30s, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. The search was on. Unaware of the chaos occurring miles away, Gabriel stepped out of the jewelry store into the cool evening air, the small gift box in his hand. Downtown was alive with energy, the glow of the streetlights reflecting off the glass buildings, and Gabriel felt a quiet satisfaction as he walked toward his car. Just as he reached for his keys, the peace was shattered. A police cruiser skidded to a halt beside him, its sirens wailing, and two white officers jumped out, their expressions hard. "Hey, stop right there!" One of the officers barked, his tone sharp and commanding. Gabriel turned, confused. His heart began to race as he saw Officer Brent Carter, one hand hovering over his holster, eyes fixed on Gabriel with suspicion. The second officer was speaking into his radio, reporting their location. "Is there a problem, officer?" Gabriel asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though he couldn't hide the confusion that colored his words. Officer Carter's gaze scanned Gabriel's appearance, his hoodie, his jeans, and without hesitation, he replied, "You match the description of a robbery suspect. Hands where I can see them." Gabriel raised his hands slightly, feeling a cold wave of disbelief washed over him. "I don't know what you think is happening, but I'm Judge Gabriel Lawson. This is a mistake," I said. "Hands up." Carter snapped, stepping forward aggressively. "You match the description of a black male in a hoodie involved in an armed robbery." Gabriel's mind raced. How could this be happening? He had just bought a gift for his wife, and now he was being mistaken for a criminal. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, trying to remain calm, though anxiety was creeping into his voice. "I just came from the store. I have the receipt. Get down on the ground." Officer Carter interrupted, his patience wearing thin. The other officer tightened his grip on his radio, signaling backup. Gabriel, recognizing the danger of the situation, began to comply, lowering himself to the pavement even as his thoughts scrambled for a way out of this nightmare. Before he could fully process what was happening, Officer Carter lunged forward, forcing Gabriel face down onto the cold, hard ground. The impact jarred Gabriel's entire body, and within seconds, he felt the sharp bite of handcuffs locking around his wrists. "I'm innocent," he cried out, but his words were drowned out by the commotion around him. The growing crowd of onlookers, some filming the incident on their phones, murmured in shock and disbelief as they watched the brutal arrest unfold. As Gabriel lay pinned to the ground, his mind spun. He had spent his entire career upholding the very justice system that was now turning against him because of the color of his skin. In an instant, all his accomplishments, his reputation, and his dignity seemed to vanish under the weight of racial profiling and police brutality. The crowd watched, some shocked into silence, others beginning to call out in protest, but Gabriel's world had narrowed to the cold pavement beneath him and the crushing realization of how easily the system he trusted could fail him. By the time the footage of his violent arrest went viral, it was clear that this was not just a case of mistaken identity. It was an emblem of racial bias that ran deep within the justice system Gabriel once believed in. His career, his standing, and his sense of security were shattered at that moment. As the video spread, it ignited a national conversation about race, justice, and the treatment of black men, no matter their status. But Gabriel was not a man to be broken. Alongside his wife, Ava, a relentless civil rights attorney, they vowed to uncover the truth behind this unjust arrest. Together, they would pull at the threads of a conspiracy that reached far beyond that single night, discovering corruption that permeated the very institutions they had once trusted. As the couple navigated dangerous political waters, Gabriel faced the ultimate moral dilemma: whether to seek revenge on the system that betrayed him or to fight for true justice, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been wronged. In this powerful tale of betrayal, courage, and redemption, Gabriel's journey forces him to confront how far he's willing to go when the very laws he once upheld now turn against him. And in the face of injustice, he learns that sometimes the only way to protect the truth is to stand against everything you've ever believed in. Brent ignored Gabriel's desperate plea, roughly pulling him to his feet. "You have the right to remain silent," Brent muttered with mechanical indifference. Gabriel, now overtaken by a potent mix of fear and fury, shouted in protest, "I'm telling you, I'm not the man you're looking for." His heart raced, the situation spiraling beyond his control. He struggled to comprehend how he, a judge, a man who had devoted his life to upholding justice, could find himself being treated like a common criminal. From the gathering crowd, a voice cried out in Gabriel's defense, "He didn't do anything wrong. Let him go." But Brent was unmoved, his grip tight as he dragged Gabriel toward the waiting police cruiser. The crowd's cell phones captured every moment, documenting the injustice. As Gabriel was roughly shoved into the back seat, a wave of humiliation washed over him, his dignity stripped away. He sat in stunned silence, his mind a swirl of disbelief and anger. How had his life, his reputation, been reduced to this? The ride to the station felt like a blur, his surroundings lost in the whirlwind of his thoughts. When they arrived, the noise and movement of the police station only added to his disorientation. Brent marched him through the front doors with cold efficiency, ignoring the fact that Gabriel's hands were still tightly bound behind his back. The harsh, sterile environment of the booking area greeted him. The glaring fluorescent lights, the echo of footsteps, and the impersonal gaze of officers around him. Brent, unbothered, processed Gabriel like any other suspect, his thin lips curling with disdain as he entered Gabriel's details into the system. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Meanwhile, across town, Ava Lawson was meticulously preparing an anniversary dinner, unaware of the chaos unfolding. The soft, warm glow of candlelight flickered in the kitchen, reflecting off the polished silverware and their finest china. She glanced at the clock with a smile, expecting Gabriel to walk through the door any minute. Her heart skipped when her phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number. Puzzled, she answered. "Hello, Ava Lawson," came the voice on the other end. "Yes, this is she. Who's calling?" "This is Rachel Porter from the police station. You need to come down here immediately. It's about your husband. He's been arrested." Ava froze. Her world tilted as she struggled to comprehend the words. What? Arrested? There has to be a mistake. Gabriel is innocent. Her voice trembled with disbelief. Rachel's voice was soft but urgent. The police were rough with him. It's all caught on video. It's spreading online. Ava's hands went cold. I'll be there in 10 minutes, she said, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and determination. She grabbed her car keys, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of the unthinkable. Gabriel, arrested? How could this be? Her husband was a man of integrity, a defender of justice. This couldn't possibly be happening. The drive to the police station felt like a nightmare. Her hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Fear clawed at her chest, but it was the rising tide of fury that fueled her forward. By the time she reached the station, her mind was set. She stormed through the entrance, the sharp clicks of her heels echoing in the chaotic space. The station buzzed with activity. Officers moved about, phones rang incessantly, and the tension in the air was palpable. But Ava's focus was laser-sharp. She marched up to the front desk, her eyes flashing with determination. I need to see my husband, Judge Gabriel Lawson. Where is he? The officer behind the desk barely looked up, his tone indifferent. He's being processed. You'll have to wait. Ava's jaw tightened. Wait? No. I'm his attorney, and I demand to see him now. Her voice was calm but firm, each word dripping with authority. She met the officer's gaze, her eyes unyielding. She would not be dismissed so easily. As she waited, Ava's phone buzzed with notifications. The video, Gabriel's arrest, his rough treatment at the hands of the police, was already making its rounds on social media. Her heart pounded as she watched the footage, fury boiling within her. Her husband, a man who had spent his career fighting for justice, was being treated like a common criminal. The injustice of it all was unbearable. She clenched her fists, whispering fiercely under her breath, Gabriel, I'll get you out of here. No one humiliates my husband like this. The station's usual chaos continued around her, officers shuffling between desks and the constant chatter of phones ringing. But none of it registered with Ava. Her entire being was focused on getting Gabriel out of this nightmare. She was ready to fight tooth and nail for him, for their life together and the truth. Ava's jaw tightened, her eyes blazing with fury. Processed? She repeated, incredulous. My husband was arrested unlawfully, without cause. I demand to speak to whoever is in charge of this case immediately. The officer, clearly weary and uninterested in a confrontation, exhaled slowly. Ma'am, you'll need to wait. We're following protocol. Ava stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerously low whisper, eyes locked on the officers. Do you have any idea who I am? She asked, each word laced with authority. I'm a civil rights attorney, and what happened tonight will not be swept under the rug. Now, find someone who can explain why my innocent husband is being treated like a common criminal. The officer hesitated for a moment, visibly unsettled by Ava's intensity, then reluctantly picked up the phone. He muttered something into the receiver, avoiding her gaze. After a few tense minutes, Brent Carter arrived, his posture rigid, arms crossed. His eyes swept over Ava dismissively, a slight smirk tugging at his lips. Mrs. Lawson, I assume? His voice was full of condescension. Ava's stare hardened. Officer Carter, I want an explanation for why my husband has been arrested. He identified himself, and yet you still proceeded to brutalize and humiliate him. Brent shrugged, entirely unbothered. He matched the description of a robbery suspect. Hoodie, jeans, black male. We were acting on the information available to us. Ava's fists clenched at her sides, her voice rising. That's your justification? You assaulted an innocent man, an esteemed judge, and now you're hiding behind racial profiling. Her words cut through the room like a knife. Brent's smirk faded, his face hardening. If he had just complied, things wouldn't have escalated, he replied coldly. Ava took a step forward, her eyes fierce. Complied? You're telling me that my husband, who posed no threat, should have just submitted to your abuse? I'm not leaving here without him. You will release Gabriel tonight, or I'll make sure you regret this. Brent's eyes narrowed, the tension between them thickening. This isn't a courtroom, Mrs. Lawson, he said icily. We follow the law here. I have a job to do, and I'll be doing it by the book. Ava leaned in, her voice a deadly whisper. And I'll make sure the world knows exactly how you're doing your job. This isn't over. Without another word, she turned and marched toward the exit, her mind already racing with legal strategies. The cold night air hit her as she stepped outside, but instead of chilling her resolve, it fueled it. This wasn't just about Gabriel anymore. It was about every innocent person brutalized by a system that had failed them over and over again. The injustice was too much to bear. She would fight for her husband, but she also knew they were fighting for something much bigger, something systemic, something that had poisoned their society for too long. Inside the station, Gabriel sat in the holding cell, his body aching from the rough handling he had endured. He had spent years upholding the law, believing in its ability to protect the innocent. But sitting in that cold cell, he realized just how fragile that belief had been. The system he had dedicated his life to was deeply flawed. The clanging of metal interrupted his thoughts as a guard appeared. "Lawson, you've got a visitor," the guard said gruffly, unlocking the cell. As Gabriel was led down the dimly lit hallway, a wave of anxiety washed over him. He hadn't spoken to Ava since the arrest, and the thought of her seeing him in this state, bruised, humiliated, stripped of his dignity, made his stomach turn. But he knew they had to stand united. They had no choice but to fight this together. By the time Gabriel was escorted into the small, cold visitation room, the video of his arrest had already gone viral. Footage of Brent Carter forcefully pinning him to the ground, hitting him as Gabriel calmly tried to explain who he was, had ignited a firestorm online. Outrage spread like wildfire on social media. Hashtags demanding #Justice for Gabriel and calling for an end to police brutality flooded the internet. In the station's break room, officers watched the chaos unfold on their phones. "You see this?" one of the officers said, shaking his head. "People are losing their minds over this judge's arrest." His colleague frowned. "It's a bad time for this kind of thing to happen. Folks are fed up with these stories coming out every other week." Outside the police station, a crowd had already begun to gather, holding signs that read, "Justice for Gabriel" and "Stop Police Brutality." The energy in the air was electric, as news outlets picked up the story and amplified the public outrage. The pressure on the department to justify its actions was mounting by the minute. Inside the visitation room, Ava sat across from Gabriel, her hands tightly gripping his, her eyes filled with both anger and pain. She had seen the video, and it broke her heart. "Gabriel, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her emotions. Gabriel looked at her, his heart heavy. "You have nothing to apologize for, Ava. This is not your fault." Tears welled in her eyes. "But it feels like it is," she said, her voice trembling. "I should have been there. I should have." "No," Gabriel interrupted firmly, squeezing her hands. "This is on them, not you. You couldn't have stopped this. But now, we need to focus on what comes next. We're going to fight this." Ava nodded, though the weight of the situation bore down on her like a ton of bricks. The world outside was already rallying to their side, but the battle ahead would be long and grueling. They had to stand strong, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had been wronged by the system. And together, they would make sure that justice, for once, was truly served. Ava nodded, though the enormity of the battle they faced hung heavy between them. Back at her law office, she wasted no time assembling a small yet formidable team of attorneys and investigators, all driven by a shared sense of justice. Among them sat her colleague Marcus Ace Robinson, a seasoned lawyer known for his sharp instincts and relentless pursuit of the truth. He sat across from Ava, his tattooed arms folded as he skimmed through the file on Brent Carter, a name that had come up far too many times in cases like this. "This guy's got a rap sheet," Ace muttered, tossing the folder onto the conference table with a look of disgust. "Multiple complaints of excessive force, especially against black men. Most of them swept right under the rug. But there are a few incidents that stand out. They're serious, Ava. This isn't his first rodeo." Ava nodded, her brow furrowed as she scanned through the documents in front of her. Each page seemed to paint a more troubling picture of Officer Brent Carter. "We need to dig deeper," she said quietly but firmly. There's no way this was just a case of mistaken identity. The way Brent handled it, there's more going on here. Ace leaned back in his chair with a knowing grin. I figured you'd say that, so I've already put out feelers with some of my contacts. We're gonna find out just how deep this runs. As the night wore on and the team continued to sift through files, Ava's resolve only grew stronger. This wasn't just about getting justice for her husband Gabriel. It was about pulling back the curtain on a system that had repeatedly allowed officers like Brent Carter to operate with impunity. It was a fight she wasn't afraid of, and as the hours ticked by, it became clear Ava was in this for the long haul. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Meanwhile, back at his dimly lit apartment, Brent Carter slouched on his couch, a nearly empty bottle of whiskey gripped tightly in his hand. The constant flood of news coverage had only worsened, and now his face was plastered across every channel. His once confident demeanor was fading as the reality of the situation began to sink in. "You screwed up this time," Officer Jack Lewis, his longtime partner, muttered as he paced the room. Jack had always been the more level-headed of the two, and even now, he was struggling to keep his cool. Brent scoffed, tipping the bottle to his lips for another swig. "Screwed up? I was just doing my job." "Your job?" Jack shot back, frustration etched across his face. "You beat the hell out of a judge, Brent. Do you have any idea how bad this looks?" Setting the bottle down with a thud, Brent's expression darkened. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair tightly. He resisted. He didn't comply. What was I supposed to do? Let him walk just because he's some high and mighty judge? Jack ran a hand through his hair, clearly exasperated. "This isn't going away. The department's going to throw you under the bus if this keeps getting worse. You need to get a grip on this before it spirals completely out of control." Brent's eyes darted toward the TV, where his name scrolled across the screen beneath grainy footage of the incident. He hated the way things were unfolding. In his mind, he hadn't done anything wrong. He had followed protocol. The suspect had matched the description, and he had acted accordingly. That was what cops did. But as the public outcry intensified and his name became synonymous with police brutality, a seed of doubt began to take root. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the bottle again, his paranoia growing with every news segment. Maybe Jack was right. Maybe this time, things were going to fall apart, and there would be no coming back. At the courthouse, the scene was a stark contrast to the quiet of Brent's apartment. The steps were swarming with reporters, their microphones and cameras trained on the podium where Ava Lawson stood, a pillar of calm amid the storm. Gabriel stood next to her, his face lined with exhaustion and the emotional weight of the past few days. The public outcry over his wrongful arrest had reached a boiling point, and this press conference was Ava's opportunity to control the narrative and demand accountability. "Thank you all for being here today," Ava began, her voice steady but filled with the fire of determination. "We are here not just for my husband, Judge Gabriel Lawson, but for every person who has been brutalized by officers who believe they are above the law." Gabriel was brutally beaten and wrongfully arrested by Officer Brent Carter, despite identifying himself multiple times. He was treated with violence and disrespect simply because of the color of his skin. This is not just about one incident. This is about a system that permits officers to abuse their power without consequences. The crowd was silent, hanging on her every word. As Ava spoke, it was clear that this fight was bigger than just Gabriel's case. It was about changing a system that had long been broken, and she was ready to take it on headfirst. The group of reporters leaned in closely, their pens flying across notepads as they eagerly captured every word spoken. "We will not stand for this," Ava asserted, her voice steady and resolute. "This issue transcends the personal plight of my husband. It speaks to the pervasive systemic racism that permits officers like Brent Carter to act with complete impunity. Today, we are demanding a comprehensive investigation not only into Officer Carter's actions, but also into the police department that allows such acts of brutality to persist without accountability." A reporter in the back raised his hand, his brow furrowed in skepticism. "Mrs. Lawson, how do you respond to the police department's claim that Officer Carter was adhering to standard procedure?" Ava's eyes narrowed, the intensity in her gaze sharpening as she replied, "Standard procedure should never encompass the brutalization of innocent citizens. We possess video evidence demonstrating that my husband did nothing to incite the violence he suffered. This is not merely a case of an unfortunate mistake. It is a blatant violation of his civil rights, and we are committed to pursuing justice through every possible legal avenue." Beside her, Gabriel sat in quiet solidarity, his expression mirroring the strength of Ava's words. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, erupting in applause and chants of support, their voices rising in unison for justice. Ava took a step back from the podium, but the fire in her eyes signaled that her fight was far from over. Inside the courtroom, the sterile atmosphere contrasted sharply with the energy surging outside. Gabriel sat at the defense table, feeling the lingering soreness in his wrists from the handcuffs that had confined him just days prior. Ava was by his side, her brow furrowed in concentration as she flipped through her notes, ready to make her case. As the judge entered the room, her expression remained inscrutable, a mask of professionalism. "We are gathered here today for the bail hearing of Judge Gabriel Lawson," she began, reviewing the case file with keen interest. "Let us proceed with statements from the defense." Ava stood, her voice resonating with confidence. "Your Honor, the charges against my client are entirely unfounded. Judge Lawson has an unblemished criminal history and poses no flight risk whatsoever. In fact, as a sitting judge, he has dedicated his life to upholding the laws that are now being used to unjustly accuse him." The prosecutor, a stern man in his mid-40s, was quick to interject. "Your Honor, while the defendant may have a distinguished career, the serious nature of the charges, including resisting arrest, necessitates careful consideration. We believe he poses a significant flight risk." Without hesitation, Ava countered, "My client has been a respected member of this community for decades. The only real risk at play here is to his reputation, which has been unjustly marred by these accusations." The judge regarded both Ava and the prosecutor thoughtfully before making her ruling. Bail is set at $50,000. The defendant is required to surrender his passport and remain within city limits until the trial date. A wave of relief washed over Gabriel, though it was tempered by the realization that this wasn't the full exoneration he had hoped for. At least he would be able to return home. Ava squeezed his hand under the table, a subtle gesture of triumph, but they both understood that this was merely the beginning of a much larger battle. Meanwhile, at the police station, Officer Brent Carter felt the mounting pressure. His colleagues were beginning to look at him with a new wariness. Some avoided him in the hallways, while hushed whispers followed him when they thought he couldn't hear. In the locker room, Brent overheard two officers engaged in a conversation that made his stomach churn. "Did you catch the news? That judge's case is blowing up. Carter's going to get buried under this," one officer said, a hint of concern lacing his voice. Brent slammed his locker shut, frustration boiling over as he glared at them. "If you have something to say it to my face." The younger officer shrugged, an air of nonchalance surrounding him. "We're just saying, Brent, this case, it's not looking good for you. Maybe you should have handled things differently." "Handled it differently?" Brent's voice rose sharply, indignation evident. "I followed procedure." He matched the description. "I did what I was trained to do." His voice echoed in the cramped space, a mix of defiance and desperation as he grappled with the growing fallout of his actions. The older officer, a seasoned and grizzled veteran of the force, shook his head slowly, a look of disappointment etched across his weathered face. "Carter, the world's watching," he said gravely. "It doesn't matter one bit if you were following procedure. Perception is everything in this line of work, and right now, the public's perception is that you crossed the line." Brent clenched his fists tightly, feeling the weight of the entire situation pressing down on him like a heavy shroud. The pressure was suffocating, and he could sense his grip on control slipping away. "I didn't cross any line," he muttered under his breath, a mix of defiance and frustration bubbling up as he stormed out of the room. But even as those words left his lips, doubt began to gnaw at the edges of his certainty, threatening to undermine his resolve. Meanwhile, at Ava's bustling law office, The atmosphere was charged with urgency. Papers were strewn haphazardly across desks, and computer screens flickered with reports and evidence, casting a dim glow in the late afternoon light. Ace Robinson, Ava's most trusted investigator, entered the room with a stack of new documents clutched in his hands. "You're going to want to see this," he announced, dropping the papers decisively in front of her. Ava's eyes darted over the pages, quickly scanning for anything noteworthy. As she delved deeper into the documents, her heart raced and her eyes widened in disbelief. This can't be right, she thought at first, but as she continued reading, the unsettling truth became undeniable. Ace confirmed the robbery that Gabriel was accused of wasn't just some isolated incident. It was part of a much larger and more insidious scheme. He pointed to a series of financial transactions linked to a powerful figure in the city, Eleanor Harrington, a prominent real estate mogul with extensive and deep-seated connections. Harrington had been laundering money through this jewelry store for years. When federal investigators began closing in, she orchestrated the robbery to deflect attention away from herself, using Gabriel as the perfect scapegoat to take the fall for her actions. Ava's mind raced as the implications sank in. Brent Carter wasn't merely acting on instinct. He was either entangled in this conspiracy or, at the very least, being manipulated by forces beyond his comprehension. "I doubt he even knows the full story," Ace remarked, his voice steady. "But Harrington, she's the one pulling the strings." Leaning back in her chair, the enormity of the conspiracy settled heavily on Ava's shoulders. This was no longer just about clearing Gabriel's name. It was about exposing a sprawling web of corruption that reached the top echelons of power. "We need to move quickly," Ava urged, her tone urgent. "If Harrington gets wind of our investigation, she'll bury the evidence without a second thought." Later that evening, Gabriel and Ava found themselves in their living room. The atmosphere transformed from a sanctuary of peace into a war room. The documents from the investigation lay spread out on the coffee table between them, a stark reminder of the battle they were preparing to face. "We're getting close," Ava said, her voice low but filled with determination. "But this is dangerous territory. Gabriel, Harrington is incredibly powerful, and if she feels cornered—" "I know," Gabriel interjected gently, sensing her concern. "But we can't back down now, not after everything we've been through." He turned to her, his gaze steady and resolute. Ava searched his face, her expression a mix of worry and admiration. "Are you sure? This could ruin everything we've built together." Gabriel reached for her hand, gripping it tightly, grounding both of them in the moment. "Ava, they've already tried to ruin us, but they failed. We're not just fighting for our future, we're fighting for the truth. We owe it to everyone who has been silenced and oppressed by people like Harrington. This is bigger than just my name being cleared." Ava nodded, a small, determined smile forming on her lips despite the gravity of their situation. "Then we'll take her down together." As they sat in the dimly lit room, the enormity of the battle ahead weighed heavily on their hearts. But for the first time since this nightmare had begun, Gabriel felt a flicker of hope ignited within him. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was ready to fight back. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 3 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. The following day, the streets erupted with life, filled with the vibrant sounds of chanting and the rhythmic beat of drums. Protesters filled the sidewalks, waving signs emblazoned with powerful messages like "Justice for Gabriel" and "End police brutality." Amid the fervor, Ava and Gabriel stood at the center of the crowd, their presence amplifying the movement that had gained momentum around them. The air was thick with tension, yet it was also electric with hope, a palpable energy that suggested a shift was taking place. "Do you think this will be enough?" Gabriel asked, his eyes scanning the diverse faces of the crowd, seeking reassurance in their shared passion. Ava, holding his hand firmly, gave him an encouraging nod. "It's a start. The more voices we have speaking out, the harder it will be for them to silence us." Suddenly, a woman approached them, holding out her phone. "I'm recording this for my social media page. Gabriel, do you have any words for the people who are fighting for you?" Gabriel hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. But Ava squeezed his hand gently, silently urging him to take this opportunity to speak. Stepping forward, he cleared his throat, ready to share his truth with those who had rallied to support him. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice steady yet brimming with deep emotion. Each word resonated through the gathering as he looked out over the crowd, filled with supporters and advocates. "This moment transcends my struggle. It symbolizes the collective fight against the injustices faced by every individual who has been wrongfully profiled, brutally mistreated, and silenced by a system that was meant to uphold our rights and protect us. We must demand change, and I assure you, we will not rest until justice is served." As his words hung in the air, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause, their cheers echoing in a powerful chant of his name. Gabriel and Ava exchanged a fleeting glance, a silent acknowledgement of their unwavering connection strengthened by the overwhelming support that surrounded them. Meanwhile, at the police station, an atmosphere thick with tension and unease was palpable. Brent Carter sat alone in a stark, sterile interrogation room, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing ominously and casting a harsh glare that amplified his discomfort. He faced the stern, impassive expressions of the internal affairs investigators, who seemed to hold the weight of the world on their shoulders. "You understand why we're here, don't you, Officer Carter?" the lead investigator asked. His voice clipped as he flipped through a substantial file filled with damning documents. "There are multiple, serious complaints of excessive force lodged against you. Your arrest of Judge Gabriel Lawson has ignited national outrage, and we are now scrutinizing your entire record." A cold sweat broke out on Brent's forehead, and he felt a knot tightening in his stomach. "I followed procedure. Lawson resisted arrest. What was I supposed to do? Just let him walk away?" His defense felt weak even to his ears. The investigator raised an eyebrow, his expression unwavering. "The video evidence contradicts your account, and we are gathering testimony from fellow officers regarding your troubling history of misconduct. This situation runs far deeper than just this one arrest." Brent shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his mind racing as he processed the gravity of the situation. It dawned on him that, despite his attempts to follow orders, the entire department seemed poised to sacrifice him to save their reputations. "You've been suspended, Officer Carter," the investigator continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Until this investigation is concluded, you are prohibited from engaging in any police activity." Brent clenched his jaw, feeling fury rise within him like a tidal wave. "You're making a mistake," he shot back, his voice laced with defiance. "Perhaps," the investigator replied coldly, signaling the abrupt end of the interview. As Brent exited the station, an overwhelming sense of paranoia washed over him. He could feel the judgmental stares of his fellow officers boring into his back, as if they could sense his impending downfall. The walls felt as though they were closing in, and for the first time in his career, Brent realized he was utterly and irrevocably alone. Meanwhile, Ava approached the grand gates of Eleanor Harrington's opulent estate, the sound of her heels clicking sharply against the stone driveway echoing in the otherwise quiet surroundings. She had dedicated weeks to meticulously gathering evidence, and now, armed with undeniable proof, she was resolute in her mission to confront the woman who had orchestrated Gabriel's downfall. Eleanor Harrington greeted her at the door, exuding an air of superiority that was almost palpable. Her silver hair was impeccably styled, framing a face marked by sharp features and a gaze that scrutinized Ava as she stepped inside. "To what do I owe the pleasure, Mrs. Lawson?" Eleanor asked, her voice dripping with a veneer of politeness that barely concealed her disdain. Ava wasted no time. "I know exactly what you did, Eleanor. You orchestrated that robbery and manipulated the police into arresting my husband, all to cover up your embezzlement scheme. I have the evidence to prove every word." A flicker of surprise momentarily crossed Eleanor's face before she quickly regained her composure, her icy demeanor reasserting itself. "That's a bold accusation, dear, but I'm afraid you're mistaken," she retorted, her voice laced with a feigned innocence. Ava stepped closer, her eyes blazing with determination. "You won't escape accountability for this. I'm going to expose you and everyone involved in your deceitful scheme." Eleanor's expression hardened, her eyes narrowing as she considered the implications of Ava's words. "You're playing a dangerous game, Ava. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Ava stood her ground, undeterred by Eleanor's threats. "Neither do you. I've already sent copies of the evidence to my legal team and several media outlets. If anything were to happen to me or Gabriel, the world would know everything." For a tense moment, the two women stood in silence, locked in a fierce battle of wills, each refusing to back down. Finally, Eleanor's expression shifted to one of cold indifference. "You may believe you've won this round, but rest assured, this isn't over." Ava took a deep breath as she turned to leave, her heart racing with an adrenaline-fueled rhythm in her chest. She could sense the tremors of uncertainty she had caused in Eleanor, but she knew that this confrontation was merely the beginning of a much larger battle. She needed to brace herself for whatever retaliatory moves might follow. The stakes were too high to let her guard down now. Meanwhile, Brent Carter's home was a chaotic reflection of his internal turmoil. The floor was littered with empty whiskey bottles, remnants of his attempts to drown his sorrows, while the drawn blinds allowed only slivers of light to seep into the room, creating an oppressive atmosphere of gloom. He sat slumped on the couch, his head buried in his hands, his thoughts a whirlwind of self-loathing and despair. Just the night before, his wife had walked out, her patience worn thin by his escalating anger and paranoia. Now, he found himself suspended from the force, his once promising career lying in tatters, and an investigation looming over him like a dark cloud. Years of dedicated service, climbing the ranks, and following orders felt like they were crumbling into dust. In a fit of rage, he slammed his fist into the coffee table, the force sending one of the bottles crashing to the floor, shattering the fragile silence. "This is all their fault," he muttered bitterly, his words slurred from the alcohol coursing through his veins. "They're trying to take me down." But deep down, beneath the fog of his intoxication, Brent was painfully aware of the truth. He had crossed a line. He had let his demons cloud his judgment, and now he was paying a heavy price. The very anger that had fueled his drive had ultimately become his undoing. As he stared blankly at the shards of glass scattered across the floor, a profound sense of hopelessness enveloped him. He realized that the only person left to blame was himself. At the same time, the atmosphere in City Hall was charged with anticipation as the mayor stood at the podium, facing a sea of reporters and concerned citizens. The pressure on the city's leadership had reached a boiling point, and they could no longer afford to ignore the growing demands for accountability and justice. "We are launching a full investigation into the police department," the mayor declared, his voice steady yet tense. "We will scrutinize not only the actions of Officer Brent Carter, but also the systemic issues that permitted this situation to arise in the first place." From the back of the room, Gabriel and Ava watched, their expressions a mixture of grim determination and resolve. They had fought tirelessly to reach this pivotal moment, but both understood that their struggle was far from over. The system, while beginning to crack under the weight of scrutiny, was not yet fully broken. As the mayor continued with his speech, Ava leaned closer to Gabriel, whispering, "This is it, the moment we've been working so hard for." Gabriel nodded in agreement, his gaze fixed intently on the mayor. "It's a start, but we have to keep pushing. There's too much at stake to let up now." As the press conference concluded, Gabriel and Ava stepped outside, welcomed by the fresh air that seemed to invigorate their spirits. The protest outside had calmed, yet the energy of change lingered in the atmosphere. They stood on the cusp of something significant, but they knew that the final confrontation was still ahead of them. Hand in hand, they descended the steps of City Hall, fully aware that they had to prepare for whatever challenges lay ahead. The tipping point had been reached, and retreat was not an option. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the trial of Gabriel Lawson commenced. Every seat was filled, the air thick with anticipation as reporters filled the back rows, their cameras at the ready to capture every significant moment. The gallery was alive with murmurs, but Gabriel's attention was singularly focused on the proceedings unfolding before him. Beside him, Ava was poised and ready, prepared to deliver the most important argument of her career. "Your Honor," Ava began, standing to address the court, her voice strong and clear, "my client is innocent of all charges, and today we will demonstrate that the arrest made by Officer Brent Carter was not only unlawful but part of a more extensive conspiracy." She stepped confidently to the center of the room, the weight of the jury's and media's gaze heavy upon her. "We have evidence linking a high-profile individual, Eleanor Harrington, to a network of illegal activities, including the very robbery for which my client was wrongfully accused. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 4 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time." The judge, a stern woman in her 50s, nodded in acknowledgement. "Proceed." Ava gestured toward the projection screen, which lit up with a series of documents and transactions that told a story of deceit. These financial records reveal connections to money laundering and fraud tied to Eleanor Harrington's company. When federal authorities began closing in on the truth, a diversion was required. The robbery was staged, and my client was framed as a convenient scapegoat. The jury leaned in, captivated by the unfolding narrative. Ava caught Gabriel's eye, receiving a reassuring nod that bolstered her resolve. She turned back to the judge, her voice unwavering. "We also possess video evidence showcasing Officer Carter's misconduct during the arrest, which clearly illustrates excessive force and racial profiling." As she played the video of Gabriel's violent arrest, an oppressive silence fell over the room, the tension palpable as the footage projected the stark reality of the events that had transpired. The prosecutor, clearly agitated and struggling to maintain his composure, abruptly rose to object, his voice cutting through the tension in the courtroom. "Your Honor, this is pure conjecture," he exclaimed. But before he could continue, the judge decisively interrupted him. "Overruled. I want to hear more." Ava, standing firm and resolute, began to speak with conviction. "This is not merely a case of wrongful arrest. It is a glaring example of systemic corruption that has not only harmed my client, Judge Gabriel Lawson, but has also victimized countless others in our community. Today, we stand here to bring that truth to light and expose the injustices that have been allowed to fester for far too long." As the trial progressed, it became evident that the scope of accountability extended beyond Gabriel alone. Now Brent Carter, the officer involved in the wrongful arrest, found himself under intense scrutiny as well. The pressure mounted considerably, especially with internal affairs concluding its investigation into his actions. Brent, who had already been suspended from duty, felt a chill run down his spine as he was summoned back to the station. Each step he took felt heavier than the last, his heart racing with the reality that his entire career was hanging by a thread. Upon entering the interrogation room, Brent faced the lead investigator, a figure exuding authority and unwavering resolve. "Officer Carter," the investigator began, his voice steady and devoid of empathy. "After a thorough investigation, we have gathered overwhelming evidence of misconduct on your part, including the use of excessive force during the arrest of Judge Gabriel Lawson. You are hereby under arrest for civil rights violations and assault." Brent's complexion turned ashen as the words sunk in. "You can't do this. I was just following orders," he protested, desperation creeping into his tone. The investigator's gaze hardened. "It's over, Carter. You can't hide behind that excuse anymore." As Brent felt the cold metal of the handcuffs around his wrists, the weight of his choices bore down on him like a crushing burden. The man who had once believed he was invulnerable and untouchable was now being led away as just another criminal, facing the severe consequences of his actions. As he was escorted into the waiting police car, Gabriel's words resonated in his mind. Justice will come one way or another. Back in the courtroom, Eleanor Harrington sat at the defense table, her previously composed demeanor starting to unravel under the mounting pressure. Despite her legal team's strenuous efforts to keep her name out of the proceedings, Ava's relentless quest for the truth had brought Eleanor's conspiracies into the harsh spotlight of scrutiny. The pivotal moment had arrived for Eleanor to take the stand. As she approached, her sharp blue eyes narrowed in a glare directed at Ava. Ava stepped forward with calculated confidence. "Miss Harrington," she began, her voice steady but firm, "you have been linked to numerous illegal activities: embezzlement, fraud, and orchestrating a robbery to cover your tracks. Do you deny these charges? Eleanor's response was immediate and icy. I deny all of it. Ava allowed a small, knowing smile to cross her lips. No proof, you say? Let me refresh your memory with the evidence at hand. She presented a series of meticulously organized financial records, each document illuminating the illegal transactions that implicated Eleanor. Your entire empire is built on a foundation of lies and corruption. You framed my client in a desperate attempt to protect yourself from being uncovered. As the evidence piled up, Eleanor's facade began to crack under the weight of Ava's relentless questioning. This is absurd. You're just trying to ruin me, she shouted, her voice rising in panic. Ava was quick to respond, cutting her off. No, Miss Harrington, the truth is that you have ruined yourself. The jury listened intently, captivated as Ava continued to dismantle Eleanor's defenses piece by piece. With each document presented, the narrative of Eleanor's deceit became increasingly undeniable. By the end of the day, Eleanor's reputation and the empire she had carefully constructed were in tatters. The once formidable figure was now fully exposed, left with no option to escape the repercussions of her actions. After weeks of intense emotional and legal battles, the trial finally reached its conclusion. Gabriel stood in the courtroom, his heart racing with anticipation and anxiety as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Judge Lawson, the judge began, her tone formal yet sympathetic. After thoroughly reviewing the evidence presented in this case, it is abundantly clear that you were wrongfully accused and subjected to an unlawful arrest. Therefore, you are hereby exonerated of all charges. As the words washed over Gabriel like a refreshing wave, he felt the immense weight that had been pressing down on him for so long lift away. Ava reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly in solidarity. The judge continued, "This case has highlighted serious and troubling issues within our legal system, issues that demand immediate attention and reform. I can only hope that the outcome of this case will lead to necessary changes moving forward." As the courtroom erupted in applause, Gabriel stood tall, feeling a profound sense of relief and justice. He had fought not just for his name, but for a greater cause, and now that justice had finally been served. Outside the imposing courthouse, a large crowd had gathered, buzzing with anticipation and hope. They were there to hear from Gabriel, whose journey had captivated many. As he emerged from the building, the cheers that erupted from the crowd were overwhelming, drowning out any other sound. It was a moment of triumph, a collective release of the tension that had built over the long months of the trial. Ava stood beside him, her heart swelling with pride for what they had accomplished together against all odds. Gabriel raised his hand to quiet the crowd, his expression a mix of gratitude and determination. When he spoke, his voice resonated clearly through the throng. "This victory is not just mine. It belongs to everyone who has ever been wronged by a system that should protect them," he declared, his tone steady and resolute. "Today, we made a significant step toward change, but let us be clear, the fight for justice is far from over. Together, we will continue that fight." As his words hung in the air, the crowd erupted into applause once more, a wave of support that felt both empowering and humbling. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Gabriel allowed himself to smile, the weight of his struggles lifting momentarily. Later that evening, as they returned home, the emotional exhaustion hung heavy on both of them, yet they were buoyed by their shared victory. The house was blissfully quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos they had endured during the trial, offering them a rare moment of peace they had longed for. They settled together in the cozy living room, a bottle of wine opened between them, its deep red color reflecting the warmth of the moment. Gabriel stared contemplatively into his glass, memories of the tumultuous journey flooding his mind. "I never thought we'd get through it," he admitted softly, vulnerability in his voice. Ava leaned her head on his shoulder, a silent show of solidarity. "But we did," she replied, her tone filled with assurance. Gabriel shook his head, his expression earnest. "No, Ava, we did this together. I wouldn't have made it without you." Their silence enveloped them for a moment, the weight of their journey palpable, yet interwoven with a newfound lightness. a profound sense of closure alongside the promise of new possibilities. "What now?" Gabriel asked, a hint of a smile beginning to form on his lips, a flicker of hope igniting in his heart. Ava lifted her gaze to meet his, her eyes shining with determination. "We keep fighting for everyone who needs it," she affirmed, her resolve evident. Gabriel nodded, the spark of purpose igniting between them. "Yeah, we do." They clinked their glasses together in a quiet celebration, a moment that marked not just the end of one battle, but the beginning of another journey hand in hand. They felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, stronger and more united than ever before. Meanwhile, in the courtroom, silence reigned as Brent Carter took his place at the defendant's table. His once proud and commanding posture now slumped under the immense weight of the trial's scrutiny. Gabriel sat in the gallery, eyes fixed intently on the proceedings, every detail etched into his memory. The prosecution presented a damning case against Brent. Testimonies from fellow officers painted a vivid picture of a man who had abused his authority time and time again, compounded by footage of Gabriel's violent arrest and internal affairs findings that underscored the gravity of Brent's misconduct. As the prosecutor delivered the final statement, it became clear that Brent's fate was all but sealed. Officer Brent Carter violated the civil rights of Judge Gabriel Lawson through excessive force and racial profiling during an unjustified arrest. His actions are not merely a personal failure. They signify a profound failure of the very system he was sworn to uphold. The prosecutor asserted, each word weighted with the significance of the moment. The jury's decision came swiftly, almost predictably. Brent was found guilty of both assault and civil rights violations. The judge's voice rang out clearly in the hushed courtroom, resonating with authority. "Brent Carter, you are hereby sentenced to 5 years in prison for your crimes. Let this serve as a reminder that no one, no matter their position, is above the law." As Brent was led away in handcuffs, Gabriel experienced a tumult of emotions. Anger, relief, and an overwhelming sense of justice finally served. The once untouchable power that Brent had wielded now felt hollow and lifeless, a testament to his downfall. Meanwhile, Eleanor stood alone, staring out of the large bay window of her now quiet estate, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the horizon. The news of her involvement in the conspiracy had spread like wildfire, leaving her once thriving business in ruins and her political allies hastily distancing themselves, unwilling to be tainted by her fall from grace. Criminal charges loomed on the horizon, a certainty she could not escape, but at that moment, she felt the walls of her world closing in around her. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 5 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. A sudden knock at the door broke the oppressive silence that had settled over her. Eleanor turned to see her lawyer, a man who had once radiated confidence in her untouchable status, standing there with an expression of defeat etched on his face. "It's over, Eleanor," he said quietly, the gravity of his words sinking in. "You've lost everything." Eleanor didn't respond. The truth was already clear to her. The powerful figure she had once been had crumbled, leaving behind only a shell of a woman whose greed and corruption had led to her undoing. Now, she stood alone, with no allies left to save her from the consequences of her actions. Several weeks had passed since the intense struggles they faced, and now Gabriel and Ava found themselves attending a community event at a vibrant local center, a place alive with energy and purpose. This gathering was more than just a celebration. It was a heartfelt recognition of their relentless fight for justice. As they entered the room, they were greeted by a diverse crowd filled with faces of all ages, ethnicities, and backgrounds. Individuals from their city who had rallied together in support of Gabriel's cause, standing firm for what was right. The air buzzed with an atmosphere of solidarity and hope. As Gabriel made his way to the podium, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause, their appreciation palpable. He paused for a moment, taking in the sea of faces that represented the community he had fought so passionately for. In that instant, he felt a profound connection to each person in the room, a shared history of struggle and resilience that transcended their individual experiences. For a fleeting moment, the burdens of the past few months seemed to lift from his shoulders. "Thank you," Gabriel began. his voice steady yet infused with deep gratitude. This fight wasn't just about me. It was about every person in this room and in this community who has ever faced injustice. Together, we've made a meaningful change, not just for ourselves, but for future generations who will benefit from our actions today. Amidst the applause, a young boy in the front row raised his hand, his face filled with curiosity. "Judge Lawson, what's going to happen now? Are we going to stop the bad cops?" Gabriel smiled softly at the boy, recognizing the innocence in his question. "We've started something important, but change doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, dedication, and all of us working together. But yes, I genuinely believe we will see that change." At that moment, Ava stepped beside him, linking her arm with his in a gesture of unity and strength. "We've shown that when we stand united, we can hold even the most powerful accountable for their actions. This is just the beginning of a long journey." The crowd cheered once more, their voices a chorus of hope and determination. As Gabriel and Ava stepped down from the podium, they were enveloped by warm embraces and heartfelt handshakes from community members, a tangible expression of hope and healing lingering in the air. Though the community had been shaken to its core, they were now on a shared path toward recovery and renewal. A few days later, Ava sat in her law office, surrounded by the hum of diligent work and determination, as she meticulously reviewed the final documents of a significant civil case she had won against the police department. The settlement not only provided substantial financial compensation, but also came with a promise of further reforms within the police force. New policies aimed at combating racial profiling and addressing police misconduct. As she affixed her signature to the papers, her trusted investigator, Ace Robinson, leaned against the doorway, a proud grin spreading across his face. "You did it, Ava. You took them down." Ava returned his smile, though her eyes were reflective, a hint of concern flickering beneath the surface. "It's a win, yes, but it's not the end of our fight. There's still so much work ahead of us." Ace nodded, his expression now serious as he understood the weight of her words. "Absolutely, but you made a real difference." Gabriel's case has already sparked crucial conversations about police reform. People are finally paying attention to the issues. Ava closed the folder with a sense of accomplishment, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and resolve. That's all we ever wanted, to make them listen and understand the importance of accountability. She glanced at the clock, noting the time. "I think it's finally time to go home. Gabriel and I have a long overdue anniversary celebration to enjoy." Ace chuckled, his eyes glinting with admiration. "You both have certainly earned it." Later that evening, in the cozy embrace of their living room, Gabriel and Ava sat together, the soft glow of candlelight illuminating the space around them. The atmosphere was peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos and turmoil that had consumed their lives for the past several months. Gabriel raised his glass of wine, the flickering candlelight reflecting in his eyes. "Here's to you, Ava. To us, to surviving through it all." Ava smiled, clinking her glass against his with a sense of warmth and camaraderie. "And to thriving," she playfully corrected him. They both took a sip of their wine, savoring the rare moment of calm amidst the storm. As Gabriel set his glass down, his expression turned contemplative. "Do you ever wonder what lies ahead for us now that all of this is behind us?" Ava nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "I think about it every single day. But one thing is certain. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together, and we will continue to fight for what is right." Gabriel leaned back, a smile playing at the corners of his lips, a sense of relief washing over him. "You know, I think we might be able to enjoy life for a little while. Maybe take a break from all the battles we've fought." Ava laughed softly, shaking her head. "Perhaps, but something tells me that we'll always find ourselves back in the fight, no matter how much we try to rest." Gabriel reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, a gesture of love and reassurance. "As long as we're together, I'm ready for whatever comes our way." They settled into a comfortable silence, reflecting on the arduous journey they had traversed together. The road had been long and fraught with pain, yet it had also been marked by resilience, profound love, and an unshakable belief that justice would ultimately prevail. As the night deepened and shadows danced around them, Gabriel and Ava finally allowed themselves to unwind, secure in the knowledge that the future, while uncertain, was theirs to shape together. Having faced down corruption and systemic injustice, they were more determined than ever to continue building a world where fairness and equality were not just distant ideals but tangible realities. As they held each other close, a warm glow of hope enveloped the room. Hope not just for themselves, but for everyone who believed in the transformative power of change and the strength of community. As we come to the end of this video, take a moment to reflect on everything we've covered today. What stood out to you the most? Is there one lesson that resonated with you? Something you can take with you and apply in your life? We'd love to hear from you. So please share one thing you've learned in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more insightful content. Thank you for watching.